Welcome to Coffee Break with JFK, the podcast that leaves you wanting more. Tonight's episode has been brought to you by Ovaltine. I don't know. I got nothing. My name's Joel Franklin Kinney. I'm your host. And it's New Year's Eve. My dogs are going absolutely batshit crazy because my asshole neighbors are blowing off fireworks. Somebody did not tell them that World War I ended in 1918. Armistice Day. My gosh. It's like any possible excuse they can to blow off the arsenal of democracy. It is so annoying. The crazy part is these idiots will do this crap at like 3 a.m. on a Wednesday in February, you know. There's no reason, not one single reason to celebrate any. They're just dicks. I mean, that's just it. I mean, I like fireworks too, but come on, not listen to me. I sound like an old curmudgeon. Oh, get off my lawn! You kids, get out of the pool! Yeah. I'm old. I don't know what it is. Okay, well, hey, tonight's the second part. You talk to him, Bubba. Tonight's a second parter. It's a doubleheader. And we're talking about, I'm going to talk about Marshall Amplifiers tonight. Jim Marshall, he's the founder. Amps are obviously named after Jim. He had a music store in England. I'm not going to really do like a big history lesson or a very accurate history lesson because don't make fun and do not judge. I didn't do the research. I'm just kind of winging this one. I'm just talking. I'm just going random. I do have the book of the history of Marshall. I could have done the research. I could have filled your head with all sorts of useless knowledge that you could really probably give a rat's ass about. But if you want to look up the information, I'm sure it's all over Wikipedia. So let's just get right into it. You know, we're not going to talk about the history of Marshall, but what we're going to talk about is what it is, what they are, who used them, and why they sound like they do. And then also we're going to talk about why I love them. All right, so let's get right in. Let's jump in. Okay, so some of you know me as a guitar player. I'm in a band called JFK. I love Marshall amps. Marshall amps are 190% of my sound. That's absolutely right. 190%. And right now, Bubba is looking at me through a crack in my vocal booth. He's like, make it stop. I just gave him a Benadryl. Both of them. Maybe that'll knock them out. Bubba, go lay down. Okay, glad you guys are in my living room with me. So, play in a band, love Marshall amps, love those, love. It's 190% of my tone. It really is about the guitar amp. And Jim Marshall in England, he owned a music store back in the 50s, probably dating back to the 40s, I would assume. All right, there's a dog inside my vocal booth. How he got in here, I have no idea. Bubba, you just chill out with me right now, buddy. You just hang out. He's in here with me. Oh my gosh. Okay, this is gonna be a short one tonight. I think I'm gonna probably do maybe a 15-minute one. I'm just going to talk about Marshall amps. Okay, so Jim Marshall forms this music store, and about in the 60s, the need to have an amplifier that could be louder became really, really important. There was a demand for it. And the early days, his original Marshall design of the amplifiers, and Marshall back in the 60s, they built all sorts of stuff, keyboard amps, PA amps, bass amps. They kind of just did it all. It was kind of like in the day, I don't want to say it was the PV but because PV builds PA speakers and bass amps and keyboard amps and all that, they kind of were of the day. Go over big with Marshall, their ads. Or maybe it would have been like, go over big with Marshall. Marshall, go over big with Marshall. It really depends on the dialect. It really depends on where you're living. So if you're in Liverpool, go over big with a Marshall. I don't think I ever saw the Beatles play through Marshalls. They were Vox guys. She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so okay, so let's talk about Jim. So Jim started creating these amplifiers in the 60s, and of course, Roy Orbison, The Who, these were people that were really like, going in to see him, and they were kind of getting the first ones. And as a matter of fact, the very first stack ever, Marshall stack, and you've heard that term. Essentially, a Marshall stack is this, people. And some of you have not gotten this right. Even my musician friends have not gotten this right. A stack is not one speaker cabinet and an amplifier head sitting on top. No, it's two speaker cabinets stacked. Did you guys hear my two quotation fingers? Stacked on top of each other with the amplifier head on top of that. Oh, what's that stand about? About 5 foot. I think a Marshall stack's about 6 foot. I think somewhere right in there. And so you're if you're like me at 5'9", your eyes are right at the knob level to be able to turn your knobs up and down. So Pete Townsend, he got the very first one, and what it was a rather than being two 412-inch speaker cabinets stacked on top of each other, it was one giant one that was the same size that had 8 speakers in it. And he went to Marshall, went back to Jim Marshall and said, I love this, but couldn't we change it? Maybe cut it in half. It's just a lot. The roadies hated it. Just hated lugging that thing. In those days, they were just a club band. And they were playing clubs, but they also played, some big venues. But having to take those things upstairs, something so heavy and so huge. So they cut it in half and they made a stack out of it. Made a stack. They stacked it up and they became the first Marshall stack. A little history there for you, huh? And so then, these other players like Eric Clapton, The Cream, they started playing Marshall. And then Jimi Hendrix in 1966 shows up in England. Yeah, Jimi Hendrix. He shows up over there and they go down and guess what they buy? They buy him a Marshall stack. That's right. Actually, they bought him a half stack first. Maybe they did get him 2 cabinets. Well, for the studio, at least, they got an amp, they got a cabinet, and they got a head. And that was the sound of the very first Jimi Hendrix album. Actually, he used them on all the Hendrix records, but he also used Fender too. But Marshall was really the number one amplifier that Hendrix ever used, and he preferred more than any. From Woodstock to Monterey to Royal Albert Hall, Marshall was tops with Jimmy. And so they became an amplifier that was really a mainstay in the arena, in arenas and clubs. And the cool thing is with a stack, you don't have to plug both cabinets in. As a matter of fact, I don't plug both cabinets in. I just stack them up because they're really pretty. And I just plug into the bottom cabinet. In the club, sometimes you just take like a half stack. One cabinet, one head, one speaker cable in the back. Voila. And it's still just insanely loud. Now, here's the deal. In those days, they didn't have what they have on the amps now, which is called a master volume. To get the overdrive, to get the distortion, to get the guitar to really scream, you had to turn these things up all the way. And it just ripped your face off. I mean, they are insanely loud. And even the modern ones that have a master volume, you can turn that master up until your ears bleed. And it is shockingly loud. Yeah, I'll demonstrate that for you guys anytime you want. You've never lived until you've been in a room, in a small room with a Marshall 100-watt amp on 10. It is, man, your fillings come in, and it's not like those dumb cars with the the little dumb lowrider car that's got, or the little stupid Toyota or Hondas that they race around that have the thumping stereo in there that just, there's so much bass you can't differentiate anything. No, these are like hit you in the forehead with a spike just mid-rangey and it shakes your teeth, but not. It's more like being run over by a Panzer assault is really the best way to describe this. So, Jimi Hendrix, The Cream, Eric Clapton, The Who, just to name a few in the 60s, but then, of course, then everybody started playing them. 10 years after, Robin Trower, and then, of course, all the bands in the 70s. Really, the majority of the bands in the 70s all played through Marshalls. Peter Frampton, Foghat, Cheap Trick, and really, it's amazing because lots of times you'll see what they have live, but they still used Marshall in the studio, or vice versa. They use something else, use a small amp in the studio. It's funny, a lot of those 70s records, you can really tell that they use small amps in the studio by the compression. Just by it just doesn't have that same sound that it does live. Thin Lizzy, Pat Travers, Scorpions, UFO, Uriah Heep, all those bands in the 70s use Marshall. And the cool thing is people still use them today. But one of the greatest ambassadors of Marshall ever, and this is so interesting to me, because on stage, he never had cabinets that said that classic cursive Marshall lettering on them. He always stripped them off or took the Marshall logo off, but his rack that was on the side stage that housed all the amplifier sections, all the amplifier heads, those all still said Marshall on them. For the majority, unless you break the roadies often accidentally broke the logo off or whatever. That's why sometimes it says Marsha, because the two L's are gone, because those things catch on everything. All right, so that ambassador I was talking about, Edward Van Halen, the one and only Edward Van Halen. Hey, if you guys can hear huffing and puffing, I do not have a cute little chica in here. No, it's Bubba is in the vocal booth with me right now as I'm doing this podcast. So Edward Van Halen completely revolutionized the Marshall amplifier. And thinking about this is really interesting to me because nobody played through a hot-rodded Marshall before Edward Van Halen hit the scene in 78. Guys would put a overdrive pedal, or like Jimi Hendrix, Pete Townsend, they would put a fuzz pedal. There was a Dallas Arbiter made a fuzz face, and they put this little round pedal. It added fuzz and sustain, but nobody took the Marshall sound and made it even more Marshall-y. What they call that is an added gain stage. An added gain stage typically is the amp, but like on 12. Gain-wise, it's dirtier, it's grittier, but it doesn't alter the tone of the amp. I guess it would alter it a little bit. When I say tone, I mean the gain, yes, but the EQ curve is all the same. Unlike, I'll give you a little education here. You get lots. All right, Bubba, come on, get. Lots of times sorry. Imagine what moms are trying to do when they're trying to work from home, and their children are just like, will not leave them alone. So, no, you need to get right now. Go lay down. Lady. All right. So, going back, a lot of players over the years that maybe couldn't afford a great sounding amplifier would buy a cheap amplifier, say a PV or a Crate, different brands of amps that are not necessarily the greatest sounding. I'm talking about in the 70s and the 80s. And then they would buy like whatever distortion box they could afford for $35 or $25 down at the pawn shop or the music store. They'd put that stomp box, that distortion pedal, they plug into that, and then the output from that goes into the amp, and then the amp distortion, the overdrive and gain of the amp usually doesn't sound very good, so they use the pedal to boost that, right? So what I'm getting at with the whole thing about it doesn't alter the tone, or if you take a Marshall and increase the gain stage, you don't want to alter the tone. You don't want to change the characteristics of the amp. But the best way to change the characteristics of an amp is add some stomp box in front of it, and then you step on that, and then it's like the amp sounds a certain way. You step on the pedal, you have all this distortion, but like there's more bass, or there's less bass, or it's muddy, or it's really trebly. The thing about adding another gain stage to the Marshall, or hot rodding a Marshall amp, is it still sounds exactly like a Marshall amp, but World War III version of the Marshall amp. And that's what's so cool about it. And that's what was so cool about Edward Van Halen. He did that using various things. He did do some modifications to the amp. They added some caps and some electronic components to change the EQ curve a little bit, make it a little more bassy here, a little less trebly there. But the amp still sounds like a Marshall. Like when you hear that first opening chord in Eruption, that first A chord, that is the quintessential overdriven, high gain, gainy, hot rodded Marshall sound. I mean, it is just, there is nothing that, if there was just one example that represented Marshall, there could only be one, and that was it, you'd go, oh, there it is. That's it. Because that is that classic Marshall on 10. Just, oh my gosh, there's nothing like that. If you're not familiar, go listen to Van Halen, pull up the first record, Van Halen 1, and listen to Eruption. Alex Van Halen starts it out, and then the guitar, that's an A chord, tuned down a half step. That first A chord, that is the quintessential Marshall tone right there. And that's the tone so many people after him in 78 have been chasing and are still chasing to this day. Like every hard rock, and I'm not talking like the death metal stuff that's all fuzzy and way too saturated and overdriven. I mean like the classic, crunchy, straight ahead rock sound from everybody from Pink records to Keith Urban to everybody, Radiohead, they all have that same, they're all seeking that same sort of crunch. And that's what that amp did. And so Eddie, he did some modifications, had a guy named Jose Arredondo, old Argentinian guy in LA back in the 70s. Didn't modify those amps a ton, but what he did was he put a Variac on it, which is a voltage transformer that he could lower the voltage on the amp. So like coming out of the wall at 110, you set the Variac at 110, plug it into the wall, plug the amp into the Variac. The Variac basically becomes the outlet, the wall outlet. But then there's a big knob on it, and you can turn the voltage down. And he found that when he starved the amp of voltage and he got it down to about 80, 85, somewhere in there, it got really distorted and the amp's volume dropped just a little bit. But what he would do was he would take, there's a bias voltage potentiometer inside the amp, inside the electronics. Get in there with a screwdriver and he would adjust that accordingly as well. And so he'd set the bias to match the voltage coming out of the wall that was already lowered, from 110 or 115 down to 80, 85, somewhere in there. I think 89 they said was his. And that amp just opens up. On top of that, you take some kind of heavy output, heavy gain pickups, and the preamp that's in his Echoplex or his Magnavox Tape Echo. That drives the signal a little bit. He also used a old, what was it, a Boss? Or was it a Roland EQ? Later, I've seen pictures of him with a MXR EQ. And all those things add gain. And that was the sound. So I've been chasing that ever since, and I've absolutely fallen in love with that tone. I remember the first time I heard Eruption in 1978. My sister had the record. I took it from her bedroom, took it over to my buddy Kelly Kauf's house. He had a big stereo downstairs. He was a rich kid, and they had this beautiful home, and downstairs was like a pool table, this massive, I don't know what it was, Clark Technique or a Pioneer big stereo system with a ginormous, Earth Mama muff, 70s clipped speakers, and we cranked up Eruption and just blew our brains out. And that whole first Van Halen record, and that's when I went, oh my gosh, I was into Billy Joel and Elton John at the time. Loved the whole songwriter thing, but that's when I knew I want to be in a rock band and I want to play guitar and I wanted it to sound like that. So after that, it's all about Marshall. You play through Fender, play through Peavey, play through, it's just none of them sound like this. None of them. And not every Marshall is the Marshall. You got to have the right amp. There's ones that don't sound so good, and then there's others that are it. There's some. They've made a bunch of models over the years. I mean, this company's been in business since the early '60s. Their amplifier designs have changed over the years, but they always maintain those original, some sort of a version of the original 50 or 100 watt head that was so famous by all those players. They've reissued all the old ones, so you can get an exact copy of the original ones, like Jimi Hendrix and Eric Clapton played through back in the late '60s. And then they, I'm still waiting for them to reissue the '70s ones. Those are my favorite looking one. The 2203, the 2204. Those are my favorite looking ones. I just love the way the white piping looks on those. But now I'm just getting into aesthetics. I mean, that's just, it's like, oh, I want big tires on that. It's just one of those preference things for me. But my all-time favorite amplifier, all-time favorite Marshall amp is the 1972 Super Lead. That is my all-time favorite one. And I own one, and it is fantastic. A friend of mine put a master volume on it, and so I can get that super high gain, but do it at kind of a bedroom level. Doesn't have too many mods to it, but it's such a great natural-sounding amplifier. I just love that amp. Well, listen, I was talking a little bit about Marshall. I'm just gabbing. Just going to ramble a little bit about Marshall. I hope you enjoyed the talk. There's so much more, and I could literally talk for days about it. There's a crunch and a clarity that is unmatched, and that deserves to be mentioned. I'm going to jump off, though. Happy New Year's to everybody. 2020. It's going to be 2021 at midnight, and countdown is coming. It's I'm sorry. It's 7:40 right now. 7:40 p.m. and it's going to be midnight, and it's going to be 2020, and I'm really hoping they figure out the world and it becomes a better place. Hopefully we'll get this vaccine thing figured out, and hopefully it'll be a better year for everybody. Again, if you have anything you want me to talk about, put it in the comments section. Please subscribe to my channel and share with people. It really means a lot. I really want to build this thing, and I can't do it without the viewer and the listener. It's really important. This whole podcast thing has kind of become a passion of mine, and I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to keep going as long as you guys will listen. Again, the topics are going to range from life, love, talk food, talk film, talk music, all sorts of stuff. And then if you want anything you want me to discuss, throw it my way. I'm going to have some guests on here. I've got another really nice mic coming in here. It'll be here next week. And then I'm going to bring in some special guests, and we're going to talk everything. I'm not sure I want to get into politics at all. I don't really think I want to talk politics much because it's just polarizing and you can't please everybody. I don't want to alienate anybody, but I got to speak my truth too. And we'll talk about the hypocrisy on in political views. Maybe we'll discuss that. But hey, you have a great night, and Happy New Year to you all. I'm going to sign off, and kiss your pet right on the lips. Midnight If your pet's near you, some of us are doing the COVID thing and staying in. Others of us are going to go visit with people. But if you're at somebody's house and they've got a pet there, kiss them right on the lips as well when the clock strikes midnight. I'm sure they'll appreciate it. All right. Have a great night.